So we're going to be back in 1 Samuel chapter 14 this morning, verses 1 to 23, continuing our series through the time in the life of Israel of the monarchy, the time of the kingdom. And last week we explored really the paralyzing power of fear. We saw King Saul, who had been chosen by God, anointed by God, empowered by God to lead God's people. And we saw how fear led him to make rash decisions, to ultimately disobey God and forfeit his kingdom. The story doesn't end there. Today we're going to go into 1 Samuel 14. We're going to find a stark contrast to Saul's fear in the life and the actions of his son, Jonathan. We're going to see courageous faith. While Saul cowers in a hole, surrounded by all the trappings of the monarchy, all the trappings of religious faith, Jonathan will take a leap of faith, believing that God can do the impossible. Anybody believe that here this morning? That with man, many things are impossible, but with God, all things are possible. So let's go ahead and dive in. 1 Samuel chapter 14. One day, Jonathan the son of Saul said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the Philistine garrison on the other side." So if you remember the context here, Saul has been anointed king, and Saul and his son Jonathan, and it was really Jonathan, picked a fight with the Philistines. And that did not go so well for them. So Saul had an army of 3,000, and the Philistines showed up with a horde. 30,000 chariots, thousands of horsemen, uncountable soldiers on foot. And so Saul is dislodged from Michmash and the strategic military locations and passes that he'd been inhabiting, and the Philistines took them, and Saul and his army just dissipated and disappeared into the mountains. They're hiding in caves. They're hiding in tombs. They're cowering in fear. And if you remember, the army began to dissolve. People began to flee. There was a reverse exodus. Many of the people left and crossed the Jordan River out of the land of promise. Last week's chapter ends very bleakly. God's people are cowering in the caves. They're hiding in the dark. And the Philistines are rampaging and controlling the area that God had given to his people. And so verse 1, Jonathan, the son of Saul, he turns to his armor bearer and he says, "You know what? Let's go look and see what those Philistines are up to." So right from the beginning of this chapter, we see Jonathan's not content to stay hiding in this hole. He hasn't given up. He's not letting the circumstances define him. He's still looking up to see what God might have. So let's go take a look. And but then verse 14 ends this way, "But he did not tell his father." Isn't that interesting? Family drama. Everybody's got it, right? He didn't tell his father who was king. He didn't tell him. And you're like, well, why didn't he tell him? And I think, reading the context of the last chapter, there's several reasons why he might not tell his father. His father has been shown over and over again to be a man that is led and dominated by fear. He's probably like, if I ask my dad's going to say no because he's always so afraid. But there's also, Saul's not only dominated by fear, but he's also vain, right? So if you remember in the last chapter, there was a victory over the Philistines. It wasn't Saul's. Jonathan did it. Saul had 2,000 warriors. Jonathan had 1,000. And Jonathan went and attacked a garrison of the Philistines, and God gave Jonathan and his warriors that victory. And then do you remember what happened? 1 Samuel 13:4, it said, "All of Israel heard it said that Saul had defeated the garrison of the Philistines and also that Israel had become a stench to the Philistines. So Saul took credit for what Jonathan had done, right? So it's not hard for me to imagine the mindset, the heart of a young man whose father is in one sense a coward, in another sense likes to steal the glory that others earn. He's like, well, I'm going to go do something, but I'm not telling Dad. Okay? So it says Saul was staying in the outskirts of Gibeah. Saul was staying in the outskirts. The Hebrew word there that's translated as staying, it literally means sitting. He's just sitting. So there's a contrast here throughout this chapter between Saul and his son Jonathan. Saul has just in so many ways accepted his defeat. He's not doing anything. He's just sitting, right? He's just sitting in the dark, sitting in a cave or under a tree. It says he's staying in the outskirts of Gibeah in the pomegranate cave. Some of your verses might say under the pomegranate tree. The Hebrew word there is Ramon. It literally means pomegranate, but it can mean a tree, or sometimes it's a place name. I think in the context, there's probably a cave that was called the pomegranate cave. So that's why the ESV translates it this way. He's just sitting, hiding, cowering, doing nothing in the cave, in the dark. And the people who were with him were about 600 men. You know, fear is contagious. Have you ever noticed that? Fear can be contagious. So here's Saul, and he's got 600 men, and they're just sitting there, and they're just going over and over again in their head how bad things are and how desperate the situation is. And the one who is supposed to lead them, Saul, is just doing nothing, just sitting still. People who were with him were about 600 men, including Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the priest of the Lord in Shiloh, who was wearing an ephod. Some interesting details in that verse. So he's there, he's got 600 warriors, but he's also got the acting priest of Israel, the high priest. And we're going to see in a couple of verses, they've actually got the Ark of the Covenant with them. Right? So they've got the ark, they've got the priest, they've got the king. Where are they? Hiding in a cave. Right? But there's some other interesting details in this genealogy, right? Like if you're like me, you start reading these lists of names and you're like, that's a weird name. I don't know how to pronounce that. What's the point? It's interesting because Ahijah, who's the acting high priest, it gives his lineage, and it traces back to Eli, who we've met. 1 Samuel started, Eli was the high priest, and his sons Hophni and Phinehas were not good dudes. And because of that, because he didn't discipline his children, because he didn't lead well, God removed his favor from Eli and said that ultimately the priesthood is going to be stripped from his descendants. It's going to go to another descendant of Aaron. Right? And if you remember, that did not end well for them. So they went to battle. And somebody came up with the idea of let's take the Ark of the Covenant and let it go in front of us like some sort of magic talisman, right? And that did not go well. Israel gets defeated, lots of them slaughtered. The Ark gets captured, right, by the Philistines. And the two sons of Eli, Phinehas and Hophni, are killed. And then when the message comes back to Eli, they tell him that his sons have been killed, that the battle's been lost, that the ark has been taken. He falls over, and because he is so large and fat, he breaks his neck and dies. Okay? Chapter 4. It's fun stuff. Okay? It's not going well. So think about that. Think about, this is the lineage. And what I find interesting about this just very brief genealogy is the inclusion of something that's not necessary. It throws in that one little phrase, Ichabod's brother. Completely unnecessary, right? You can remove Ichabod's brother out of this text, and you can know exactly who Ahijah is and that he's descended from Eli. But the author throws this in. Oh, he's Ichabod's brother, which is to remind us of chapter 4, which I just described to you, because after Eli falls over dead. His daughter-in-law goes into labor and delivers a son. And she names him Ichabod, which means the glory has departed. Makes sense now why Ichabod's just thrown into this little mini genealogy. The author wants you to visualize this. Here is the king and the disgraced priest and 600 beaten, discouraged, broken men hiding in a cave in the dark, sitting, doing nothing. It's a dark picture of God's people. The people did not know that Jonathan had gone. So within the passes by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistine garrison, it's interesting, the verb there for go over, we saw it in the first verse. It means to cross over. It's the same word of crossing the Red Sea. It's the same word of crossing the Jordan. It's kind of this echo of Jonathan is once again going to trust God to cross over into promise. And so he's there, and there's a rocky crag on one side and a rocky crag on the other side. The name of one was Bozez, which means slippery, and the other name was Senna, which means thorny. Okay, so this is not an easy walk, right? This is mountainous pass, and so he's coming up in this dry riverbed, a wadi, and so on one side you got slippery, on the other side you got thorny. Now he's on one side, the Philistines are on the other. So in order to cross over and see what's going on, he's going to have to climb down slippery, walk across the dry riverbed, and climb up thorny to see what's there. Okay, so it's not an easy cakewalk. Right? And to do that is going to put him in a position of incredible vulnerability. So you've got Philistines on the other side. You start climbing down. You start walking across this open riverbed, and then you're going to climb up while they're above. There's a million ways they can kill you while that's going down. Right? So this is a dangerous activity that he has taken upon himself. And he's brought his armor bearer along with him. It says, the one crag rose on the north in front of Michmash, and the other on the south in front of Geba. And Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, come, let us cross over. Let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. Now that's interesting. That's intentional, the way he is framing this. He doesn't say, let's go up against the Philistines. He says, let's go up against the uncircumcised, which tells us how Jonathan is framing and understanding what is going on around him. Okay, now you might read this and be tempted to think that this is some sort of ethnic slur, right? Like Jonathan's like, we're the circumcised and they're the uncircumcised. This is an ethnic Israel versus an ethnic Philistine sort of thing. But that's not how circumcision is viewed in the people of God. It's not a purely ethnic thing. If you remember when God, through Moses, led the people out of Egypt, it wasn't just descendants of Abraham that went. There were people from Egypt, there were people from many other nations that came together on the mountain and received the law and the covenant. It was never an ethnic reality. It was always a spiritual reality. So when Jonathan says, hey, let's go see what the uncircumcised are up to, what he's saying is, let's go see what God's enemies are up to. You see that with me this morning? Like this is not some derogatory racial insult. This is a spiritual view of reality. We are the circumcised because that's the sign of the covenant. Right? We belong to God. We're God's people, and the sign that God gave them of the covenant was the sign of circumcision. Uncircumcision then becomes the sign of those who are not yet God's people. Right? So He's not just seeing them as his enemy, as Israel's. He's understanding them as to what they are, as to enemies that are in rebellion against God. Let's go over to the garrison of the uncircumcised. And then, what a statement he says here. It may be, oh, I love this. It may be that Yahweh will work for us. For nothing can hinder Yahweh from saving, either by many or by few. What a statement of faith. And I want you to notice, it's not a conclusive, deterministic statement of faith. He's like, who knows? Let's go see. And that is, in its essence, the essence of faith. It's not certainty. It's not conclusive, right? It's, who knows? Here's what I do know. God can take care of this. God doesn't need a big army. God can handle this with one, or he can handle it with 1,000. Who knows? Here's what I know. God can handle it. Let's go see what could happen. That's the posture of faith. I don't know. I can't see. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I'm going to operate on what I do see and what I do know, and here's what I know. These Philistines ain't got nothing on God. So let's go see. Let's go see. And see, this is not an abstract faith in God's power. This is Jonathan claiming the promises of God in the covenant. Right? It's going to go up against the uncircumcised. He is circumcised. He is a covenant member of God's people. And he knows the promises of God. Promises like Leviticus 26, 3-8. God says, if you walk in my statutes and observe my commandments and do them, then I will give you your rains in their season, and the land shall yield its increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Your threshing shall last to the time of the grape harvest, and the grape harvest shall last to the time for sowing, and you shall eat your bread to the full and dwell in your land secure. These are the blessings of the covenant. If you honor me, if you keep me first, if you do what I've asked you to do, if you live up to your calling as a kingdom of priests, man, I'm going to blow you away with providence. God continues. He says, I'll give you peace in the land. Jonathan understands he has anything but peace in the land because of the covenant breaking, the unfaithfulness of Israel. But he is trusting still in the faithfulness of God. Like God says, I'll give peace in the land. You'll lie down and none shall make you afraid. I will remove harmful beasts from the land, and the sword shall not go through your land. You shall chase your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall chase 10,000, and your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. Jonathan knows the promises of God. Jonathan chooses to believe the power of God, the possibilities of what God can do if God will be trusted. Who knows what will happen? Here's what I know. God can take care of this if we will trust him. Over and over again, God has proven this to be true. Like Joshua meditated on this and declared in Joshua 23, verse 10, he says, 1 man of you puts to flight 1,000, since it is the Lord your God who fights for you, just as he promised. It's not about the size of your army. It's not about how many swords you have. Like if you remember, there's only 2 swords in the whole army. Saul's got 1. Jonathan's got 1. Like Israel's in a really bad place because of the decisions and choices that Israel has made. But God is still faithful. And Jonathan here, what a model of faith. What a stark contrast. Saul, the anointed king, is huddling in fear in a cave. And Jonathan's like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know God is able. So he's going to act. Right? Like this is such a constant theme that we've seen so far as we've been walking through the scriptures together. That God does not need large armies. God doesn't need the power of man to accomplish. It's not by might or power, but by the Spirit of God. Right? We just came out of Judges. Remember Gideon? Gideon blows the horn, and this massive army forms, and God's like, yeah, that's not going to do. Not because there weren't enough, because there was too many. God's like, I don't want you guys to take credit for this. So God whittles it down, and whittles it down, and whittles it down, right? Until with a very small force, what does God do? He just whoops the enemies. Not just of Israel, but the enemies of God. Because it's not by might, it's not by power. It's like, it just takes one. It just takes one who is trusting in Yahweh. It just takes one who will walk in faith. And God moves. I want you to keep Gideon in mind here. I'll come back to him in a minute. But, many of the Psalms exult in this, how Yahweh fights for his people. I spent some time this week in Psalm 44. It's another one of the Psalms of the sons of Korah. I like this. It says this, "Oh God, we have heard with our ears, our fathers have told us what deeds you performed in their days, in the days of old." So it just starts out like, God, we've heard the stories from our fathers, from our grandfathers, God, about how you moved. We've heard. It says, you with your own hand drove out the nations, but them you planted. You afflicted the peoples, but them you set free. God, we've heard the stories about how the walls of Jericho fell down. Like, we've heard the stories about how you established your people. God, how you have been the mighty warrior that fought for Israel. Verse 3, "For not by their own sword did they win the land, nor did their own arm save them, but your right hand and your arm and the light of your face." Why? "For you delighted in them." You delighted in them. What a contrast this is to the whole context where we've been in Samuel, where the nation in radical disobedience, unfaithfulness, then they decide, I know what we need. We need a king like everybody else. Israel asking for a king like all the other nations is Israel asking to move forward, not with God as their warrior, but with human power. They're asking to go a different direction than what God has done. It's never been about Israel's strength. It's never been about Israel's might. It's always and only been about God. Jonathan gets this. So his armor bearer in verse 7, I love this, his armor bearer is never named. It's like one of my missions in the kingdom to come. One of my missions in eternity, I want to find the armor bearer, right? I want to find this dude. Like, let's talk, because he's a good dude. Like, so Saul and everybody are there. Jonathan and this unnamed armor bearer, Jonathan's like, let's go do something crazy. And he's like, cool, I'm in, right? Like, he said, his armor bearer says to him, do all that is in your heart, do as you wish. Behold, I am with you, heart and soul. That's a ride or die, right? Like, I got your back. I'm with you. I love that. I said earlier that fear is contagious. Faith is also contagious. Faith is also, I think that's what we're witnessing here. Jonathan's like, who knows? But I know what God can do. An armor bearer, unknown armor bearer is like, cool, let's go. Like, faith is contagious. And I think there's a lesson here. Faith is communal, right? It's not just Jonathan by himself. And I think that's important. I think that's significant. Like, Jonathan goes, but he goes with this unnamed armor bearer. He needs that because it's not good to be alone. It's not good to be independent. It's not good to be isolated. Like Jonathan is acting, but he's not acting by himself. Faith is contagious and it's communal. And that's we've seen that in the story. Moses, he needed Aaron, right? Even Jesus, God made flesh. What does he do as he begins his ministry? The very first thing he does is gather for himself a community. Doesn't do it alone. He does it in relationship. And then when he sends his disciples out to do ministry, to do his work, he's very inefficient. He's got 12 of them, or he's got 72. He doesn't say, all right, you 12, you all go different directions. He doesn't say, you 72, you all go out on your own. That would have been the most efficient, but no, he sends them out 2 by 2, right? Because that's not accidental. It's not incidental. It's intentional. We're not supposed to walk in faith by ourselves. I don't know if you've heard this before, but we're better together than we are by ourselves. Do all that's in your heart, do as you wish. Behold, I am with you, heart and soul. There's some covenantal echoes in that. Heart and soul, I'm in. Then Jonathan said, behold, we will cross over to the men, and we will show ourselves to them. So this is his plan. We're not going to try to sneak in. It'd be nearly impossible. Just the geography, what they're facing. So we're going to go, we're going to stand on the top of the cliff, and we're going to reveal ourselves to the enemy on the other side, on the other cliff. So we're just going to show ourselves to them. And if they say to us, wait until we come to you, then we'll stand in our place and we will not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hand, and this shall be the sign to us. Oh, that's interesting. Jonathan's acting in faith, but he's seeking God's blessing and leading. So he comes up with this sign. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to show ourselves. We're going to announce ourselves. And if they say, hey, we're coming over to you, then we're not going to do anything. We'll probably run back and hide. But if they say, come over to us, we're going to go over to them. And that's going to be the sign that God is going to be with us. So both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines, and the Philistines said, look, the Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves. Just imagine the tone of voice, the mocking, the ridicule. Oh, look at the little Israelites coming out of their holes. I just think whack-a-mole, right? Like just, oh, look, isn't that cute? And the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, come up to us and we'll show you a thing. And Jonathan said to his armor bearer, come up after me, for Yahweh has given them into the hands of Israel. It's interesting. You know, I mentioned Gideon. Gideon, of course, sought a sign from Yahweh as well. He put out the fleece, and it wasn't enough for him, so he had to do it again. So what's the difference between Gideon doing that, which is condemned as a bad thing, and Jonathan doing this? And there's a world of difference. Gideon was given explicit instructions by God. You're going to go here, you're going to do this, and you're going to fight these people, and this is how it's going to go. And I'm going to give you victory. Jonathan hasn't been given any of that. He has no instruction. God hasn't told him. God hasn't given him a detailed pathway. All he's acting on is faith. He's acting on what he knows about God, what he knows about the covenant, what he knows about faithfulness, and what he knows about God's ability to do the impossible. Gideon says to God, well, if you prove yourself to me, then I'll move. Then I'll do it. Jonathan says, I'm moving, and I need you to direct me as I go. I think this is maybe like the central issue in this passage for me is about the active nature of faith. The contrast is between Saul, who's just sitting, waiting, doing nothing, and Jonathan, who, like, God hasn't said, hey, Jonathan, go up and do this. God hasn't given him a clear indication, but Jonathan's like, here's what I know. I know we're the people of God, and they're not the people of God. I know that this is a land of promise. I know that if we're faithful, God will fight for us. I know that God is able to deliver us. I know that it's not about how many warriors we have or how many warriors they have. So I'm going to act. So he doesn't sit around waiting for God to roll out the red carpet. He doesn't sit around waiting for a detailed explanation and directions and instructions. He just starts moving. But it's not like, hey, God, I'm going to do this. You better back me up. No. Okay, God, I'm going to do something, but I know that if you don't show up, I can't do it. So, God, I'm going. If you don't want me to do this, I need you to stop me. And if you do want me to do this, I need you to show me. So here I'm asking for a sign. And this is not disobedience. This is not a lack of faith. That was Gideon. Gideon showed a lack of faith by asking for a sign. Jonathan is demonstrating his faith by asking for a sign. God, I want to serve you. God, I want to be used by you. God, I don't want to sit and cower in a cave in fear. So God, I need you to show me where to go, how to go, when to go. So God, give me a sign. That is his act of faith. It's actively seeking God's will. So Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet. That tells you a little bit about the steepness of the incline. And I think there's something about that is just, you imagine him having to climb down, walk across the river, and then climb back up. It's so steep. It's so treacherous. He's got to use his hands and his feet. It puts him in this humbled, open, treacherous position. His decision to walk forward in faith put him in greater danger. It put him in greater danger. But he was trusting in God. So he did what he had to do. Wasn't easy, wasn't convenient, it certainly wasn't comfortable. I don't know, they named the cliff Thorny for a reason. So he's climbing it on his hands and his feet, and his armor bearer after him. And they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer killed them after him. So they climb up to the top. Jonathan goes, whoo, pulls out his sword and gets to work, right? And so you just see him going forward, and he's attacking. His armor bearer's coming behind, and he's cleaning up the mess. It says, at that first strike, which Jonathan and his armor bearer made, killed about 20 men within, as it were, half a furrow's length in an acre of land, half an acre. So there they are. They said, hey, come on up and we'll show you a thing. And Jonathan's like, cool, let's go. Climbs up, takes out his sword, and starts going. And 20 of them fall like grass before him. Because it's not by might. It's not by power, but it is by the Spirit of God. And then it says, and there was a panic in the camp. He killed 20 guys. They had 30,000 chariots. Thousands and thousands of horsemen. Uncountable numbers of foot soldiers. He killed 20 guys. Just hear Monty Python in my head. It's a mere flesh wound, right? So, it's nothing, right? It's nothing from a physical, earthly perspective. It's nothing. 20 soldiers is nothing to the Philistine horde. But he kills 20, and panic erupts in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. So it's not just there in that little half acre where he takes out 20 guys. Panic begins to spread throughout the entire Philistine army, the horde. It says the garrison and even the raiders trembled, and then the earth trembled. It quaked, and it became a very great panic. Like this is one of God's moves. He likes to shake the ground. He likes to shake it up. So all Jonathan does is start moving forward and say, hey, God, if you want me to go, give me the sign. God gives him the sign, and so he goes. And he takes out 20 guys, and God's like, now watch. Right? And he begins to shake. And fear begins to spread. And the army begins to lose it. And so there's this great panic. Even the earth trembles before Yahweh. And the watchmen of Saul in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude was dispersing here and there. So yeah, they're gonna feel, they're gonna hear. Listen, when the earth starts to shake and you're in a cave, you tend to pay attention, right? That's just like so. But they come out of the cave, they start looking around. What do they see? They see Philistines running around like chickens with their heads cut off, right? Like it's panic. They're being routed. There's something chaotic and crazy going on among the Philistines. And so Saul said to the people who were with him, let's do a head count and see who has gone out from among us. And when they had counted, behold, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. So Saul's like, he looks out, he sees something happening. He's like, who went out there? They figure it out. Oh, it was Jonathan and his armor bearer, the only ones that are not here. So Saul said to Ahijah, he's the priest, he says, bring the ark of God here. For the ark of God went at that time with the people of Israel. Which again, there's something about that image. The ark of God, the footstool, where the Shekinah glory, the very presence of God would manifest, has been dragged by Saul and the high priest into a cave in fear. Something so tragic about that imagery. And Saul, we look at this and we go like, well, maybe Saul's getting it right. He's calling for the ark. He's calling for the priest. He calls the priest. He's like, hey, come. What we see, Saul's faith is reactive, not proactive. Right? It's religious, but it's not reliant. This comes after the case. Oh, something's happening. I guess we better ask God. Why were they not asking God before? Why was it only Jonathan and his armor bearer that decided to go out and trust God? Why did it take this earthquake to get Saul to get up and actually do something? So he calls them, get the ark. Verse 19, while Saul was still talking to the priest, the tumult in the camp of the Philistines increased more and more. So Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. Once again, Saul, in the midst of chaos, chooses not to do the right thing and not to trust God. So he calls, here's what the text tells us. The high priest is there, and he's wearing the ephod, the priestly garments. In the ephod, the priestly garment, is a pouch where the Urim and the Thummim are kept. And we don't really know what the Urim and the Thummim are. There's some sort of divination tool, or they could cast lots where God could tell his people things that they should do. So when Saul says, hey, bring out the ark, and he calls the high priest, and the high priest is there, and he would be getting the Urim and the Thummim, he would be asking God for revelation, for direction and discernment. And it's getting so crazy out there that Saul goes, you know what? Don't bother. Don't even want to hear what God has to say. Withdraw your hand. It's a tragic irony, because God had already withdrawn his hand from Saul and his kingship. Then Saul and all the people who were with him rallied and went out into the battle, and behold, every Philistine sword was against his fellow, and there was a very great confusion. Saul's like, yeah, we better get out there. Like God needed him. Like God was doing okay. Right? So God didn't need Saul to kill the Philistines. He didn't need the Israelites. They didn't have swords anyway. God just had the Philistines kill each other. Right? That's effective. Right? Like God is pulling us up. And there was a very great confusion. There's a couple other little details here. The Hebrews who had been with the Philistines before that time, and who had gone up with them into the camp, even they turned to be with the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. So now we get a little new information. There had been some traitors. There have been some Israelites who did this. Oh yeah, let's go with the Philistines. Listen, if 30,000 chariots show up, you might I want to go with them. I want to go with them. So a group of Israelites, this is covenant unfaithfulness, right? In the extreme. Let's go hang out with the Philistines. And so now it goes, and they're like, back we go to Israel, right? It's kind of a picture of how Israel operates in this time period. Back and forth, back and forth. Likewise, when all the men of Israel who had hidden themselves in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they too followed hard after them in the battle. So Yahweh saved Israel that day. It's like the author wants us to be, oh, yeah. The traitors came back and the people hiding went out, but let's be really clear about who saved Israel. It was God. The Lord saved them. The Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed beyond Beth Aven. Remember last week I told you Beth Aven is a corruption of Bethel, house of God. It means house of idolatry, house of worthlessness. God is cleansing the land. Even while Saul is king, while the high priest, while the army is being unfaithful and hiding, all it took was the faith of Jonathan and his armor bearer for God to faithfully move and do what he had promised to do. Just takes a mustard seed. Just takes a little bit of faith. Because it's not about the amount of faith. It's not about the amount of people. It's not about anything that we might look at and judge as what we need to be sufficient to the task before us. It's always and only about God's sufficiency, God's ability, if we will but trust him. Yahweh saved Israel that day, which is what the story's always been. It's always been about God saving his people. What a great story this is about faith. Faith in action. You know, we live in a world, we live in a culture, we live in a church culture here in the West in this time where faith is something that is talked about all the time, but radically misunderstood and talked about in radically different ways. There's this whole spectrum of how we talk about faith, right? So on one hand, we might find people that faith is just nothing but intellectual belief and certainty. I know these facts to be true, and that's my faith. And I don't need to, there's no experience, there's nothing, it's just the facts, right? And then we have the other end of the spectrum where faith is just this magic, right? Faith is this magical ability to control God, to have God do what we want him to do. Just name it and claim it, right? And so faith is this like spectrum of like, where it's either incredibly passive, like Saul sitting in the cave, God, I'm just waiting for you to make the way, right? Or way too active. God, this is what you must do, and I demand it in the name of Jesus. And if you send me $29.95, I'll make sure that happens. Mercy, amen. Right? Like, but Jonathan stands in the middle. He shows us this beautiful picture of what faith is like. Like that faith isn't the ability to manipulate God. It's also not passive, just sitting and waiting for God to do everything. No, God has invited us to join him in his work and to actively trust him. And it's when we step out in faith that God meets us there. Faith isn't passive, it's active. I love, and you know this verse, we walk by faith and not by sight. You know what it doesn't say? It doesn't say we sit by faith. We wait by, no, we walk, we live. It's active. It's stepping out into the unknown, trusting that God will meet us there. Faith is not certainty. It's also not irrational, okay? Faith isn't blind in that sense. Faith is trusting God with the unseen because of what we have seen about God. Faith is the ability to trust God with the unknown because of what we have come to know about God already. Right? So it's not certainty, but it's also not stupid. Right? I love Jonathan. He's like, Well, I ain't going over there unless God is going to get me over there, right? Like, I'm not walking out there. I'm not putting myself in that danger unless I know God is there, right? But it's also, who knows? God can do it, so let's try. Let's try. There are far too many in the church today who are paralyzed by grace. Just sitting and waiting. Oh, God, I'll serve you as long as you make it really clear. God, I'll serve you. I'll do whatever you want me to, but you got to give me a detailed GPS, turn-by-turn, highly detailed map, and then it's go time. And God's like, hey, I want you to walk by faith and not by sight. I think maybe I've shared this story before, but the most powerful image of this kind of faith that I've ever experienced in my life was, I was a youth pastor in Oregon, and I was taking my youth group down to the coast for a day on the beach. And one of the kids in the group brought a friend of his who I'd never met before, and his friend shows up and gets out of the car and pulls out a white cane. He's blind. Awesome, cool, welcome, let's go. So we get into the van, we drive down to the coast, and I'm talking to this kid, getting to know him. Nice kid. And we get down to the beach, and his friend that brought him is leading them down onto the beach, and we get down there and we build a fire, and we're doing stuff, playing. And then this kid turns and looks to me and goes, hey, I've always wanted to do something. I'm like, well, what's that? He goes, I've always wanted to run. And I just like that hit me. This kid had never run. Something that, like, as children, we take for granted. In fact, like, you go watch the kids out there. That's their normal pace. Yeah. They don't walk, they run, right? Like, they just, but this kid, he was blind. He was born blind. He'd never run. He's like, if I understand this right, this might be the safest place for me ever to run. And I said, you want to run? I want to run. I said, let's run. So he takes off his glasses. He puts down his cane. I get on one side. His friend gets on the other. Soon the whole group is around him. And we just start running down the beach, running in the sand. He fell in like 3 steps. It was awesome. He fell. He laughed. He get up. And with just wild glee, like pure joy, ran. Goofy as you can imagine. Arms flailing everywhere. He didn't know what he looked like, right? Like this, it was, I stopped and I wept. He couldn't see where he was going, but he had people around him that he trusted, and so he was willing to run. He was willing to run. Didn't mean he didn't fall. He fell. He got back up, and he kept running. And I'll never forget that moment. And see, that to me is, like, when I think about faith, I think about that moment. I'm wanting God to turn the light on. I'm wanting God to give me LED strips to show me the path. And God's like, hey, walk into the dark. But I got you. I got you. I'm with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. I'm not going to abandon you. I'm not going to give you all the information you'd like to have. Nope, that's not how this is going to work. You're going to walk by faith, not by sight. But come join me, because that's where I am. Come join me, because that's where I am. So this is the reality of faith. Hebrews 11:1 says it so well. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So often, we flip that around and say, God, I will have faith in you if you just show it to me. It's like, no, that's not faith then. That's sight. Sometimes God does show it. Sometimes God does give us sight, and that's okay. Then you got to walk on that. But there's other times, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, God says, hey, I want you to trust me. I want you to trust me. I want you to come. Let's go. Stop sitting in the cave. Let's go. It's time to walk. It's time to run. It's time to go. I need you to trust me. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Just because it is not seen does not mean it is not real. Faith isn't the enemy of reason. It's not the absence of reason. Faith is the ability to trust God, that even though we may not see it or understand it, that at the end of the day, it will be worked together for good. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not real. Hebrews 11 is called the faith chapter because it starts with this declaration. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And then it begins to walk through the story. It starts with creation, and then it gets to Abraham, the father of faith. Remember Abraham, he trusted God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. God came to him and said, like, if you follow me, I'll make you into a nation. I'll make your name great. Anybody who blesses you will be blessed. Anyone who curses you, I will curse. And in you, all the nations, all the peoples, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And Abram's like, cool, let's go. God said, that's faith. You're able to step into the unknown. Where are we going, God? Where are we going, God? Abraham says, God says, just follow me. I'll show you the place. And he went. And so Abram and his wife Sarah, they had Isaac, I love what this next verse 12 says. Therefore, from one man, Abraham, and him as good as dead. I love that. Right? You're not 100 years old and barren and infertile, and God's like, yeah, that's the one that I want to create a nation out of. But that's exactly what God did, right? From this one man, as good as dead. How good do you need to be? Right? You're like, I don't got much to offer. Are you breathing? You're good. You're good. Because it's not about you. It wasn't about Abraham. It was always about God. So from this one man, him as good as dead, was born descendants as many as the stars of heaven and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. But these all died in faith. Abraham saw the land, but he didn't inherit it. Abraham saw some kids and grandkids, but he didn't see the nation. Not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. So we walk by faith and not by sight, but actually walking by faith is its own kind of sight. It's seeing beyond the circumstances of the present to the promises of God in the future. So they never saw it, but they saw it. They never saw it, but they saw it, and so they lived it out. So this is such an obvious statement, but let me say it anyway. God's playing the long game, right? It's not your lifetime. It's not the lifetime of your kids or your grand. God's playing the long game, and faith is a long game. That's hard for us because we're immediate gratification people. We're a culture of the instant. We want it now. We want it our way. We want it just in our faith. And faith goes, oh, it's coming. It's coming, but it's a long game. Faith is a journey. Faith is a process. Faith is part of our identity. This was true for all the saints mentioned in Hebrews 11. After this, it goes on listing saint after saint. Some that had great victories, some that were martyred and killed for their faith. The chapter ends this way. It says, all of these men and women, these saints of old, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. So they lived by faith, and hear this, they died in faith. Now, that doesn't mean they died in vain. It doesn't mean they lived in vain. No, in fact, they died looking ahead. Now, we're on the other side of the cross. So the writer of Hebrews says, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. God's playing the long game. And God's not interested in rescuing one person or one people. God is absolutely determined to reclaim all of his creation for himself. And so on the basis of what has come before, on the basis of a life of faith by all the saints of old, the author continues in chapter 12, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. So they're dead, but they're not dead, right? They're dead, but they're not gone. We're surrounded by this cloud of witnesses, and this is a Roman term for the crowd in the Colosseum, just watching and cheering and calling out to those that are doing the athletic competitions and activities. Like, we're surrounded. Abraham's watching, Isaac's watching, David's watching, Jonathan and the unnamed armor bearer are watching. And they lived and they died in faith. Therefore, since we're surrounded by this cloud of witnesses, let us, church, lay aside every weight. Cast aside every sin that clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race set before us. Church, faith is not passive, it's active. You're not called to sit, you're called to run with endurance what God has called you to do. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus. Isn't that what it's always about? Looking to Jesus, who is the founder and perfecter of our faith. The author and perfecter of our faith. He is the object of our faith, and his faith itself is that which we live in. Looking to Jesus, founder and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame. And because of that, he is now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Last week we saw Jesus never caved into fear, right? So amazing. Never gave in to fear. But the inverse we see this week is just as true. Jesus always demonstrated perfect faith. He lived by faith. And it's the faith of Jesus, right, that satisfies the wrath of God. It's the faithful obedience of Jesus that allows his death on the cross to become our freedom from the power of sin and death. Jesus not only shows us how not to live in fear, he shows us how to live in faith. So that's why the author of Hebrews says, look at Jesus, remember Jesus, watch Jesus, think about how Jesus operated, and walk that way. Not waiting in passivity, but walking and actively trusting God. You know, I mentioned last week the Garden of Gethsemane, that great moment, that night that he was betrayed before he goes to the crucifixion. And there Jesus, he's like, tries to get his friends to pray with him. They all keep falling asleep. And he goes to the Lord, and it's this great prayer. Lord, if there's any other way, you've prayed that before, right? God, please give me another option. If there's any other way. And some would look at that and say, oh, that's a lack of faith in Jesus. No, this is, like Jonathan, this is his demonstration of faith. I know that, God, with you, anything is possible. And I know what you've asked me to do. And we know that he's committed to do it. But he's also saying that if there's another way. But how does he end it? He ends it with this great prayer of faith. Yet, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Jesus is the ultimate example of faith, and his faith changes everything. See, Jonathan's faith invites us into this race of faith, not a sprint fueled by certainty or control, but a long, enduring journey marked by trust in God's promises and God's power. Like Jonathan, we may not always see the full path ahead, but faith calls us to step out courageously, trusting that God is working even when the outcome is unclear. Jesus shows us that we are called to lay aside the weights of fear, doubt, sin that slow us down. And Scripture calls us to fix our eyes on Jesus, who has already finished and run the race perfectly, and now empowers us to run with perseverance. Church, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So today I challenge you. What weights do you need to lay aside? What cave have you been cowering in? What fears or doubts are holding you back from stepping out in faith? May Jonathan's example inspire us. Perhaps the Lord will act for us. Faith is not certainty, but confident trust in God's character and God's promises. So let's run the race together, encouraging one another, inspired by the great cloud of witnesses, and empowered and focused on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Let's step forward today, knowing that God is with us, and he is able to do far more than we could ever ask or even imagine. Amen?